December 31, 2006. The British Treasury quietly transferred $83 million to the United States government. There were no headlines, no speeches, no victory parades. But with that payment, Britain finally finished paying for World War II, 61 years after the war had ended. 3 generations of British taxpayers had paid America for the simple privilege of surviving. This single payment exposes a truth that history books rarely confront. That debt was not the cost of winning the war. It was the price America charged Britain for being allowed to remain in the war. And the interest payments were only the surface layer of a much deeper extraction. Between 1940 and 1945, the United States carried out the largest peaceful transfer of wealth in human history, not through invasion, not through conquest, but through contracts, leverage, and desperation. Britain entered World War II as the richest empire the world had ever seen. The British Empire controlled nearly a quarter of the planet's land surface. London was the financial capital of the world. The pound sterling was the global reserve currency. British citizens owned vast overseas investments, railways in Argentina, mines in Chile, plantations in Asia, oil in the Middle East. Britain was not just powerful, it was the banker of the world. Britain exited the war bankrupt. Its gold reserves were gone. Its foreign investments were liquidated, its military bases were leased away for nearly a century, and it owed the United States $31 billion, almost $500 billion in today's money. But the real loss was not financial. The real loss was sovereignty. This was not generosity. This was not friendship. This was not an equal alliance. It was a calculated asset-stripping operation, executed with legal precision, while Britain was fighting for its life against Nazi Germany. To understand how modern global power actually works, you need to understand how Lend-Lease truly operated, what Britain was forced to sell, why American aid was cut off just 7 days after victory, and how the 1946 loan completed the destruction of British economic independence. This is not just a story about World War II. It is a blueprint for how empires are built in the modern era, through debt, dependency, and crisis exploitation. On December 8, 1940, Winston Churchill wrote what may be the most consequential letter of his life to President Franklin Roosevelt. History presents this letter as a plea between allies. In reality, it was the opening bid in Britain's financial surrender. Churchill admitted something almost unthinkable. Britain was completely broke, not struggling, not short of cash, bankrupt. The British Treasury could no longer pay for American weapons. And this admission matters because, just months earlier, Britain had been the wealthiest nation on earth. It held enormous gold reserves. Its investments generated global income. Its currency anchored international trade. In just 7 months of war, all of it was gone. The mechanism was simple and devastating. When war broke out in 1939, the United States declared neutrality. Under the Neutrality Acts, Britain could buy American weapons only under cash and carry rules. No credit, no loans, immediate payment in dollars, and Britain had to transport the goods itself. Britain had no choice. German submarines were choking supply lines. British factories could not meet demand. So Britain paid in gold. In 1940, under Operation Fish, Britain shipped nearly its entire gold reserve across the Atlantic through waters filled with German U-boats. Billions in gold bars and securities were transferred to North America. This was not aid. This was liquidation under fire. By late 1940, the gold was exhausted, but the war was nowhere near over. This is where the mythology of Lend-Lease begins. Roosevelt sold it to the public with a comforting analogy. If your neighbor A.'s house is on fire, you lend them a hose. You don't sell it. It sounded humane, it sounded moral, and it was profoundly misleading. Behind closed doors, the negotiations were run by U.S. Treasury Secretary Henry Morgenthau, Jr. His position was ruthless and explicit. Britain would receive no assistance until it had sold every asset it possibly could. Morgenthau demanded a complete audit of the British Empire, public and private assets alike. While London was being bombed, Britain was forced to open its financial books to a foreign treasury. Morgenthau wanted proof of desperation. He got it through a forced sacrifice. American Viscose Corporation, a major U.S. industrial firm owned by a British company, was seized and sold at a fire sale price. Worth over $100 million, it was sold for nearly half that amount under extreme pressure. The dollars went straight to the US Treasury. The losses stayed with Britain. This was not an isolated case. British-owned assets across the United States were liquidated the same way, quickly, cheaply, and under coercion. By 1941, Britain had sold more than $1 billion in overseas investments accumulated over generations. Only after this extraction was complete did American supplies begin flowing. Even Britain's strategic position was monetized. In exchange for 50 obsolete American destroyers, ships the US Navy did not even want, Britain granted the United States 99-year leases on critical military bases across the Atlantic and Caribbean. These bases later formed the backbone of American global military dominance. Britain traded future power for present survival. Buried inside the Lend-Lease Agreement was a clause that quietly sentenced the British Empire to death. Article 7 required Britain to dismantle its system of imperial trade preferences after the war. This system was the economic glue holding the empire together. Without it, British industries would be exposed to superior American competition across empire markets. British negotiators understood exactly what this meant. They knew they were signing away the empire's economic future. But with German bombs falling on London and starvation looming, Britain had no leverage. It signed. As the war continued, the imbalance widened. American industry exploded. US GDP surged. American factories produced weapons and consumer goods simultaneously. Britain, by contrast, shut down civilian production entirely. It abandoned global markets that it would never recover. American companies moved in permanently. By 1945, the transfer was complete. Global gold reserves had shifted to the United States. The dollar replaced the pound as the world's reserve currency. Financial power crossed the Atlantic, and it never came back. Britain believed that sacrifice would be rewarded after victory. It was wrong. On August 15, 1945, Japan surrendered. 7 days later, President Truman abruptly terminated Lend-Lease. Supply ships were ordered to turn back mid-ocean. No grace period, no transition. Britain's lifeline was cut overnight. The British economy was still fully mobilized for war. It depended on American supplies for food, fuel, and raw materials. John Maynard Keynes warned that Britain faced economic collapse. Without aid, Britain would face shortages bordering on starvation. With no alternatives left, Britain begged for a loan. In 1946, the United States offered $3.75 billion, not as a grant, but as a loan, with interest. The conditions were brutal. Britain was required to make the pound sterling freely convertible into dollars. Keynes warned this would trigger a financial run. He was ignored. When convertibility began in 1947, the world rushed to dump pounds for dollars. Within weeks, Britain lost a quarter of the loan. The policy was suspended, but the damage was irreversible. Britain's status as a global power was finished. The debt was never forgiven. For more than 6 decades, Britain made annual payments to the United States. Through economic booms, recessions, political revolutions, the payments continued. The final installment was made in 2006. So who benefited from this extraction? American banks earned massive fees from forced liquidations. American corporations acquired strategic assets at distressed prices. The United States emerged with the world's gold, the dominant currency, a global network of military bases and unprecedented influence. Britain was not defeated on the battlefield, it was defeated at the negotiating table. And this pattern did not end with Britain. It was repeated across the world. Crisis creates dependency. Dependency demands concessions. Concessions transfer wealth and sovereignty. Germany, Japan, others followed the same script. This is not about hatred or blame. It is about understanding how power really works. In the modern world, empires are not built by marching armies across borders. They are built by controlling capital, currency, and credit, especially when allies are at their weakest. Britain defeated Hitler, but in doing so it lost its empire, and for generations it paid the price. If this analysis made you question what you were taught about alliances and power, then you already understand what this channel is trying to do. And if you think something here is incomplete, exaggerated, or uncomfortable, put your view in the comments. Real understanding begins with questioning the stories we inherit.